The world Melissa crafted for her son, Carl, was a masterpiece of safety. It was a world of rounded corners and outlet plugs, of pre-approved playgrounds and sanitized hands. The air in their home smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and unrisked potential. Donald, her husband, lived amiably within its borders, though Melissa sometimes caught him looking at the tall oak in the backyard with a calculative gleam in his eye, as if measuring it for a future treehouse he knew she'd never permit. 7-year-old Carl was the gentle heart of this serene kingdom. He followed the rules, used the sturdy plastic cups, played with the toys that promised no pinch points, and always asked for help. Melissa's love was a soft, all-encompassing blanket, and she tucked it tightly around him every single day. The bubble popped on a Tuesday at 7:12 a.m. to the sound of cascading glass. It was the orange juice. The real orange juice, in the heavy, elegant glass carafe that was meant for weekend brunches, not rush school day mornings. Melissa had her back turned, arranging whole-grain toast into a smiley face. Donald was rummaging in the hall closet for a missing gym bag. Carl, standing on the designated helper's stool, had watched his mother pour for years. His small hands, itching for agency, had wrapped around the cool, smooth belly of the carafe. He'd lifted, his tongue poking out in concentration. It was heavier than he'd imagined. The weight shifted, the pour went wide, and in a frantic, sloshing correction, the entire vessel leaped from his grasp. The sound was catastrophic, a symphony of shattering, followed by the great, sticky splat of a quart of orange juice hitting the floor and exploding outward, carrying with it a galaxy of lethal-looking glass shards. Time froze. Melissa's gasp was a sharp, wounded thing. Carl. The name was a siren of panic, a cocktail of "I told you so" and "Are you hurt?" and "Stay right there. Don't you move a muscle." She moved instinctively, a human shield between her child and the aftermath of his ambition. But Donald was already there. He had moved not with panic, but with a strange, deliberate calm. He didn't go to Carl first. He went to the disaster zone, kneeling at its edge in his work slacks, his eyes scanning the glittering, citrus-scented wreckage. Carl was a statue of shock on his stool, his lower lip trembling, his eyes huge pools of impending tears. He was waiting for the world to crumble, for the scolding, for the disappointment, for the confirmation that he was too small, too clumsy, too much. Donald's voice, when it came, was low and steady, an anchor in the chaotic sea. "All right, Captain," he said, not looking at Melissa's horrified face. "First mission, and it's a big one. Hazard assessment." Carl blinked. "Captain?" Donald pointed a firm finger at the floor. "Look at the battlefield. Where's the immediate danger zone? The biggest, sharpest pieces." Sniffing hard, Carl pointed a tiny, hesitant finger toward a dagger-like shard near the fridge. There. "Good eye. That's ground zero. Now, what's the safe path? How do we get you off that stool and out of the splash zone without a single cut?" Slowly, guided by Donald's questioning, Carl mapped a route, a step to the left, a big stretch over a puddle, then a clear dash to the tile by the door. His tears receded, replaced by a furrow of strategic thinking. As Carl executed his retreat with immense seriousness, Donald finally looked at Melissa. Her hands were pressed to her mouth, her eyes still wide with the vision of what could have happened. Donald reached out, squeezed her wrist. His voice was for her alone, a gentle murmur beneath Carl's focused breathing. "This is the first safe risk, Mel. The risk of trying and failing." He didn't mean to break it.
But he meant to try.
He wanted to do something for himself. If we only yell about the glass, we break that trying spirit. And that's a fracture that doesn't heal clean. He stood, grabbing the dustpan and brush. "Okay, Captain," he called, his tone shifting back to mission control. "Phase 2, damage control. Your job is the paper towels for the juice.
My job is the glass.
Mom's job is to supervise and provide moral support. Team effort." Melissa, her heart still thrumming like a trapped bird, watched her son. Carl wasn't cowering anymore. He was moving, carefully, purposefully, grabbing a roll of towels bigger than his head. The shame was gone, replaced by a solemn duty. As Donald began to sweep, the sharp ting of glass in the pan a stark reminder of the peril, Melissa saw the bubble wasn't just popped. It was gone. And in its place, on a sticky Tuesday morning, stood her small son, not as a victim of a mess, but as a recruit in his own life, learning his first, crucial lesson, that a mistake is not the end of the world. It is, if handled right, the very beginning of competence. The playground was no longer just a playground. To Melissa, it was a catalog of worst-case scenarios disguised in primary colors. The slide was a potential friction burn, the merry-go-round a vertigo-inducing projectile launcher. But to Carl, since the great juice spill, it had become a terrain of possibilities. And to Donald, it had transformed into their most vital laboratory. Their subject stood, neck craned, at the base of the spiderweb. Officially called the Monkey Mountain Multinet, it was a towering, tangled skeleton of thick, blue-knotted ropes, a chaotic geodesic dome designed to be climbed inside and out. It was the territory of the 8 to 10-year-olds, the bold and the scrape-kneed. 7-year-old Carl, with his careful hands and his mother's voice still a whisper in his ear about waiting until you're bigger, had always given it a wide, respectful berth. Today, he was rooted to the spot, his backpack slipping off one shoulder. Melissa's fingers found Donald's forearm, her grip tight as a tourniquet.
Donald, no.
Look at the height. Look at the gaps. If he falls through, it's a 10-foot drop onto hard rubber mulch. His leg could. Sure, Donald murmured, not unkindly, his eyes locked on their son. Don't say it yet. Just watch him. He's not charging in. He's doing the calculus. Melissa looked. Carl wasn't bouncing with impatient energy. He was still. His eyes tracked a path up one side of the net, his head tilting as he followed a possible route through the maze of hexagons and squares. He'd shift his weight, frown, and start his visual climb again from a different knot. He was measuring, assessing, his little brain firing with spatial reasoning and risk assessment. He was, Donald realized with a surge of pride, working the problem. Donald walked over, casting a long shadow across Carl's chosen launch point. Planning your ascent, mountaineer? Carl jumped, as if caught in a secret. He pointed a grubby finger. I think if I start here and put my foot there and then grab that blue knot, I can get to the inside part. It looks softer. Solid tactical thinking, Donald nodded, his voice adopting the tone of a seasoned guide. But a plan on the ground is one thing. The net moves. It shifts. Your plan needs a backup. And a backup for your backup. Show me your first 3 handholds and your first 2 footholds. Then, show me your escape route if it goes wrong. Carl's face lit up with the intensity of a general preparing a siege. He traced his route in the air, speaking in a serious, low voice. Hand here, foot there, other hand on the cross rope. If my foot slips, I drop to my knees and hold on with both hands. Execute, Donald said, stepping back. The first move was confident. The second, wobbly. The net swayed under his slight weight, a living, breathing thing. Carl's planned foothold was farther than he'd calculated. He strained, his fingertips white on the rope. For a heart-stopping second, he dangled, one foot searching for purchase in empty air. Melissa took a sharp step forward. Donald's arm shot out, a gentle barricade. Carl didn't cry out. He let go with his left hand and swung it wildly, catching a different knot. He pulled, scrambled, and got both feet into the webbing. He was inside the mountain, breathing heavily, cocooned in blue rope. For 20 minutes, the laboratory conducted its experiment. Carl would climb, slip, get stuck, and retreat. He tried a different tunnel. He learned to brace when others climbed nearby, sending shockwaves through the structure. Once, his leg plunged through a hole up to his thigh, and Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. But Carl, eyes wide with surprise, not fear, wrestled his own limb free, grunting with effort. He never made it to the summit.
Not that day.
When he finally descended, his hands were red and rope-burned, his knees smudged with dirt, and a single, glorious streak of grime painted his cheek. He dropped to the mulch and stumbled over to them, his chest heaving. Melissa was already digging in her bag for wipes. Donald knelt, bringing himself to Carl's eye level. Report. It's harder than it looks, Carl panted. The holes are tricky. And when big kids climb, it's like an earthquake. And what did you learn about the earthquake? You have to stop and hold tight until it passes. Then keep going. Donald placed a firm hand on Carl's shoulder. That, right there, is the second safe risk. The physical risk with a plan. It's not about preventing the fall, Captain. It's about engineering the recovery. He looked over at Melissa, who had frozen, a wet wipe in her hand. He wasn't being reckless. He was being a physicist, a gymnast, and a strategist. All at once. Carl, buzzing with the adrenaline of exertion and minor triumph, grinned a gap-toothed grin. Can we come back tomorrow? I think I see a faster way up the other side. Donald stood, ruffling his son's hair. You bet. As they walked back to the car, Carl's small, rope-burned hand confidently in his, Donald leaned close to Melissa. He didn't just climb a net today, he whispered. He climbed a little bit out of the bubble. And he didn't float away.
He's grounded, Mel.
More grounded than ever. Melissa looked back at the towering blue web, no longer just a hazard, but a conquered territory. She slipped the unused wipe back into its package. For the first time, she saw the mulch not as a hard landing, but as a soft place to learn how to fall. And getting back up, she realized, was the most important part of the climb. Melissa believed in the sanctity of the playdate. It was a civilized institution, as structured and beneficial as a junior symphony rehearsal. She curated participants for optimal harmony, selected activities that fostered cooperation, and provided snacks that were both nutritious and neutral. A Melissa-led playdate had a clear arc: icebreaker, collaborative project, shared snack, gracious goodbye. Conflict was an uninvited guest, promptly shown the door. So, when Carl returned from an afternoon at Leo's house, the universe seemed to have cracked. He wasn't just dirty, he was morally disheveled. Mud streaked his jeans, one sock was defiantly missing, and his expression was a thundercloud of injustice. It was unfair, he burst out, slamming the door on the tidy world of his mother's design. Leo just changed the rules. In the middle of the game. And then he said my tag didn't count because I stepped on a crack, but he made that rule up after I tagged him. Melissa's internal alarm switched from dirt to social crisis. She knelt, her voice a gentle probe. Oh, honey, that's not fair at all. We have rules for a reason. Would you like me to call Leo's mom, and we can talk about how to play nicely next time? It was the logical next step in her playdate protocol. Adult mediation. No, Carl wailed, his frustration doubling at the suggestion. That's baby stuff. Donald, who had been observing from the kitchen doorway while pretending to fix the leaky faucet, saw the critical moment for what it was. This wasn't a breach of etiquette. It was a raw, vital plunge into the deep end of human interaction. He dried his hands on a towel. Sounds like a constitutional crisis, he said, his tone light but serious. A collapse of the social contract. This requires investigation.
Backyard. Now.
Melissa shot him a look. This is not the time for your games. But Donald simply nodded toward Carl, who was already stomping towards the back door, a little revolutionary seeking a better forum. The backyard became their courtroom. Donald settled into a weathered Adirondack chair, a judge, without a gavel. Plaintiff states the rules were changed mid-game. Defendant, one Leo, allegedly invoked the crack rule ex post facto. A serious charge. Walk me through the timeline. What was the original treaty? Carl, pacing on the grass, spilled the chaotic narrative. It had started as standard tag. Then Leo, finding himself perpetually it, had declared it was now zombie tag, where the tagged person also became a zombie, creating a horde. Then, when Carl had cleverly used the swing set as a safe zone, Leo had declared no safe zones. Then came the infamous crack rule. And what, Donald asked, leaning forward, was the negotiation process? Did you voice your objections? I said it was cheating. He said it wasn't cheating if you're the one making the game better. Then Sammy said we should vote, but Leo said the person who's it is the president of the game and doesn't have to vote. Melissa listened, horrified. It was anarchy. It was Lord of the Flies with juice boxes. So you had a few options, Donald mused. You could have continued under the unjust regime. You could have tried to rally the other citizens, Sammy, was it? To stage a coup. Or you could have seceded from the Union. I quit, Carl said, crossing his arms. I went and dug in the mud by the fence. A valid form of protest, Donald nodded. So, let's review. You experienced a unilateral change in terms. You advocated for your position. A third party proposed a democratic solution. That solution was rejected by the ruling power. You weighed your options and chose to remove yourself from a situation you found unjust. Sounds like you navigated a pretty complex social labyrinth there, Captain. Carl's angry pacing slowed. He was no longer just a victim, he was a strategist reviewing his moves. Donald looked at Melissa, who stood arms crossed on the patio. This, Mel, is the third safe risk. The social risk of negotiation. It's messy. It's unfair. It's full of power grabs and bad logic. There are no adult referees on the playground of life. He has to learn to advocate, to compromise, to persuade, and sometimes to have the guts to walk away from a bad deal. He turned back to Carl. The goal isn't to have a mom-sanitized playdate where nothing ever goes wrong. The goal is to get muddy in the mess of other people's ideas. It's safe because we're here to debrief after. To ask, what could you have done differently? Was walking away the best power move? How does it feel to be the one who changes the rules next time? A slow, understanding dawned on Carl's face. The indignation was softening into contemplation. Maybe, he said slowly, next time I could say, okay, zombie tag, but the zombies have to walk slow. Then it's my rule too. Donald's smile was a beam of pure triumph. Now you're treaty making. That's diplomacy. Later, as they went inside, Melissa looked at the lone, muddy sock abandoned on the lawn. She thought of her perfect playdate arc, so clean and predictable. Then she thought of Carl's messy, frustrating, vital afternoon. He hadn't just played a game. He'd grappled with fairness, power, and the art of the deal. The dirt would wash out of his clothes. But the lessons from the unscripted playground, she was starting to understand, were the kind that stained you for life, in the very best way. Melissa's universe had corners. Safe, predictable, 90-degree angles. Donald's universe had a gravitational pull all its own, centered on a 10 by 12-foot sanctuary at the back of the garage, the workshop. To Melissa, it was a chamber of horrors. It hummed with a latent, dangerous energy. The air smelled of sawdust, metal, and latent catastrophe. Tools hung on the pegboard like surgical instruments for a surgery she never wanted performed. The table saw was a grinning mouth of jagged teeth. Everything in it whispered of splinters, severed digits, and flying debris. To Carl, since the net climb and the social skirmish, it had become a temple. He would linger at the threshold, a pilgrim forbidden from entering the inner sanctum, watching his father transform rough, meaningless wood into something with purpose and form. Donald never explicitly barred him, but his unspoken rule was as solid as the oak he sanded. You enter when you are ready, not when you are curious. The Saturday of the Hammer dawned with a peculiar solemnity in Donald's demeanor. After breakfast, he met Carl's expectant gaze and gave a single, slow nod. Sanctum today, Captain. You've earned your briefing. Melissa, wiping counters, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dishwater. Donald, trust the process, Mel, he said, his voice low. This is the next evolution. In the workshop, Donald didn't start with a tour of the dangers. He started with silence. He let Carl absorb the sacred hush, broken only by the buzz of a single fly against the window. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating dancing dust motes above the workbench. This space, Donald began, his voice reverent, is not about building birdhouses. It's about building focus. One split second of lost attention in here has permanent consequences. Do you understand the gravity? Carl, standing perfectly straight, nodded, his eyes huge. Your first mission, Donald said, reaching not for a pre-cut kit or a soft piece of balsa, but for a solid, 6-inch block of pine, dense, grainy, real. He set it on the bench with a definitive thunk. Next, he selected a tool. Not a toy plastic mallet, but a real, forged steel hammer with a smooth hickory handle. It was small, a toolbox hammer, but its weight was absolute and serious in the quiet room.
He placed it beside the block.
Finally, from a jar, he produced a single, 3-inch nail with a sharp, glinting point. Melissa appeared in the doorway, a silent sentinel. Her knuckles were white on the frame. A hammer. His fingers. His thumb. His eyes. Donald saw her, but held his course. He addressed Carl. Your mission is not to make something pretty. Your mission is to make this nail disappear into this wood. More than that, your mission is to learn the marriage of force and control. He picked up the hammer, demonstrating a fluid, elbow-driven swing, ending with a soft tap on the wood. The force comes from here. He touched his elbow. The control comes from here. He touched his eyes, then Carl's. Your eyes lock on the head of a nail. They never leave it. Not for a blink. The hammer is an extension of your will.
Now.
Show me your stance. Carl's small hand wrapped around the handle. It was heavy, alien. Donald adjusted his grip, positioned his feet, and stepped back. The first strike was a ghost of a tap. The nail barely registered it. Commit, Donald said, his voice calm. The nail respects conviction, not caution. Carl drew the hammer back further. Thwack. A wild, shoulder-driven swing that missed the nailhead completely and struck the raw wood with a sickening, deep-throated crack. The force reverberated up the handle, jarring Carl's arm, throwing him off balance. He staggered back a step, shock and failure on his face. Melissa's intake of breath was a sharp hiss. Donald's arm shot out, not to take the hammer, but to steady Carl's shoulder. Recalibrate, he said, no scolding, only data in his tone. You used the wrong joint. You took your eye off the target. Reset. Tears of frustration pricked Carl's eyes, but he set his jaw. He repositioned his feet, lifted the hammer, and focused so intently on the silver nailhead that the rest of the world dissolved. Melissa, the buzzing fly, the terrifying saws, all gone. There was only the nail. He swung from the elbow. Thunk. A perfect, solid, beautiful connection. The nail buried itself a 1/4 inch into the pine, standing straight and true. A gasp, not of fear, but of pure awe, escaped Carl. He had commanded real force. He had bent the physical world to his will, responsibly. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The rhythm found him now. A steady, percussive beat of purpose. His brow was furrowed, his tongue out in concentration, his entire being poured into the simple, profound act of driving steel into wood. Sweat beaded on his temple. He was not playing. He was working. Donald finally looked at Melissa. Her hand was no longer white-knuckled. It was covering her mouth, her eyes shimmering. He walked to her, his voice barely a whisper. This, he said, is the risk of real responsibility. It's the antidote to helplessness. I'm not trusting him with a tool. I'm trusting him with the understanding of consequence, with focus, with his own capability. This hammer tells him he is strong enough to build and disciplined enough not to destroy. Thunk. Thunk tap. The nail was gone, its head sitting flush and perfect with the wood grain. Carl lowered the hammer. His arm trembled with fatigue, but his face was alight with a primal, quiet triumph. He looked at the block, then at his father, then at his mother. In that moment, Melissa didn't see a dangerous tool. She saw the key to a lock. She saw her son, no longer just a child to be protected from the world, but a person who could begin to shape it. The workshop wasn't a chamber of horrors. It was a forge, and her little boy had just felt his first real fire. The Lego Millennium Falcon was more than a toy. It was Carl's Sistine Chapel, a sprawling, gray and white testament to 2 weeks of meticulous, breathless labor. It had consumed the dining room table, its instruction manual a sacred text filled with hieroglyphs of tiny, specialized pieces. Melissa marveled at his focus. Donald admired the engineering. It was a monument to the new Carl, the one who calculated climbs and swung hammers. Then came the structural flaw. It was in the mandible, the tricky, angled front section. Carl had felt a slight give earlier, a wobble he'd tried to ignore. Now, as he pressed a final gun turret into place, the entire left side assembly gave way with a soft, plastic crackle. Not a catastrophic explosion, but a slow motion, sickening unraveling. Key struts disengaged. The mandible sagged, then detached, raining a cascade of specialized gray bricks onto the table and floor with a sound like falling teeth. Carl didn't make a sound. That was what terrified Melissa most. He didn't cry out. He didn't call for help. He simply stared as the empire he'd built crumbled at the edges. His shoulders tensed, rising up toward his ears. His breath hitched, then stopped altogether, held in a lungs-bursting suspension. His small hands, which had wielded a hammer with such control, curled into white-knuckled fists on the tabletop. "Oh, sweetie," Melissa murmured, moving toward him, her arms already forming a cradle for his disappointment. "It's okay, we can fix it. Daddy can help." Donald, reading a book in the adjacent armchair, lowered it slowly. He saw not a boy with a broken toy, but a pressure cooker about to blow. "Melissa," he said, a quiet but firm command. Wait. It was too late. The offer of help was the final trigger. A guttural, ragged noise tore from Carl's throat, a sound of pure, impotent fury. His arms swept across the table in one violent, blind arc. Brrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr It disintegrated mid-flight, a supernova of Lego. Hundreds of pieces peppered the room, bouncing off walls, skittering under furniture, clattering into every corner. The silence that followed was absolute, ringing, and horrifying. Carl stood amidst the devastation, his chest heaving. The fury evaporated as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a vast, hollow shame. He looked at his hands, the instruments of the destruction, then at his mother's stunned face, and finally at the apocalyptic scatter of his dream. A single, hot tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. Melissa was frozen, a statue of maternal anguish. This was beyond a tantrum. This was a seismic event in his soul. Donald placed his book down. He didn't go to Carl. He didn't start picking up pieces. He walked to the epicenter of the blast and slowly, deliberately, sat down on the floor, cross-legged, about 6 feet from his son. He gathered a few stray bricks in his palm, not rebuilding, just holding them. That, he said, his voice calm and low, like he was commenting on the weather, was a truly powerful feeling. It feels like a tornado, doesn't it? Like it just picks you up and spins you around and there's no stop button. Carl's head jerked up, shocked by the words. He'd expected yelling, punishment, a storm to match his own. He got quiet observation instead. It's okay for the tornado to be here, Donald continued, looking at the pieces in his hand. Everyone has them. I've had them. Mom's had them. Big, howling winds of it's not fair and I can't stand it. The tornado isn't bad. It's just weather. He looked directly at Carl, who was now listening, mesmerized through his shame. But here's the thing, Captain. It's not okay for the tornado to wreck the whole town. It can't throw the good china. It can't hurt the dog. It can't hurt other people. And it's our job, a really hard, lifelong job, to learn how to let the tornado roar inside without letting it tear up the outside. He patted the floor beside him. Sit with me. Let's just watch it together until it passes. Hesitantly, legs shaky, Carl sank to the floor. He didn't sit close. He kept a distance of shattered Lego between them. Melissa, her heart breaking and mending all at once, leaned against the doorframe, understanding now that her instinct to comfort was a bandage on a broken bone. This needed a different kind of medicine. They sat in silence for a full 5 minutes. Donald didn't fidget. He just breathed, slowly, audibly, modeling calm. Carl's ragged breaths began to sink, gradually slowing, deepening. The violent tension leaked out of his shoulders. The Falcon was really important, Donald stated, never calling it just Legos. A fresh tear rolled down Carl's nose. He nodded. The feeling when it broke, that was a tsunami. And the feeling after you broke it, that's the floodwaters. Both are real. Both are awful. He paused. Next time the tsunami feeling comes, and it will, your mission is to see if you can feel it without becoming it.
Can you say, ah?
Here's the tornado. It's very loud. I am going to put my hands in my pockets and wait for it to leave. It's the hardest mission of all. Carl finally spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. I couldn't stop it. Not this time, Donald agreed. But you're learning. This, he said, glancing at Melissa, making sure she absorbed it, is the fourth safe risk. The emotional risk of feeling big, uncomfortable feelings. Letting him feel the full, devastating force of his own frustration and shame without rushing in to fix it or shame him for it. He has to learn he can survive his own weather. Donald finally stood, extending a hand to Carl.
Now.
The town is wrecked. Storms do that. What's phase 2? Carl took his hand, standing on wobbly legs. He looked at the catastrophic mess. Rebuild, he whispered.
Exactly.
Not today, but tomorrow. The rebuild is always an option. As they began the long, quiet work of gathering the scattered pieces, not to rebuild the Falcon, but just to restore order to the room, Melissa understood. The safe risk wasn't about preventing the storm. It was about building a sturdy enough inner house to withstand it, and knowing that after the worst winds pass, you're always still standing there, capable of picking up the pieces. It was a Tuesday again. Melissa realized this with a twist of superstitious anxiety. The great juice spill had been a Tuesday. Now, a year's worth of Tuesdays later, Carl stood by the front door, a miniature explorer poised on the edge of a new world. His mission, his first solo bike ride to the neighborhood mailbox and back. A distance of 4 blocks. A journey of light years. The plan had been workshopped like a military campaign. Donald had drawn the route on a napkin, right at the oak, left at the blue hydrant, straight past the 3 friendly dogs, mailbox on the right. They had practiced it together 6 times. Carl wore his helmet, a bright beacon of yellow. His backpack, empty save for the key, was strapped tight. The bike, recently tuned, gleamed. Melissa stood at the living room window, her coffee cold and forgotten in her hand. The glass felt like the thin, fragile barrier between the curated world of her heart and the unpredictable universe outside. He has to cross the driveway at the corner, she said, her voice tight. Mrs. Gable never looks before she backs out. Donald stood behind her, his hands warm on her shoulders. He knows to stop, dismount, and look both ways twice. We drilled it. He's got the protocol. What if he falls? What if a dog gets loose? What if he gets there and can't work the mailbox key? What if? Melissa, Donald said softly, his voice cutting through her spiraling questions. Look at him. Carl was not at the door anymore. He was straddling his bike at the end of the driveway, but he hadn't pushed off. He was performing his own pre-flight check. He tested his brakes with a serious squeeze. He looked left, right, left again. He adjusted his helmet strap. He was not an impulsive boy rushing into traffic. He was a pilot running down a checklist. He's synthesizing, Donald whispered, pride thickening his voice.
Watch.
This is the final exam. Carl pushed off. His pedaling was deliberate, not frantic. He reached the corner and, just as drilled, put his foot down, leaned over and looked both ways with an exaggerated turn of his head. He waited for a car they couldn't even see to pass. Then he crossed. From the window, they became silent commentators on the silent film of his journey. The physical risk with a plan, he navigated the cracked pavement on Maple, steering around it with a careful tilt, his body remembering the balance learned on the rope net. The risk of trying and failing. At the blue hydrant, he misjudged his turn, wobbled for a heart-stopping second, but recovered without putting a foot down, a minor failure instantly corrected. The risk of real responsibility. He was the sole guardian of the bike, the key, the rules of the road. His focus was absolute, the same focus that had driven the nail. He stopped fully at the stop sign, a white square of obedience in a world that often rolled through. The social risk. A group of older kids were lounging on a wall near the mailbox. Melissa's breath caught. Carl slowed. He didn't look at them, but he didn't cower. He walked his bike the last few feet with a studied neutrality, claimed his space at the mailbox, and worked the key. It stuck. He jiggled it, calmly persistent. One of the older boys said something they couldn't hear. Carl didn't react. He retrieved the mail, locked the box, and turned. As he passed the boys, he gave a single, small nod, not a challenge, not a plea for approval, just an acknowledgement. A tiny, flawless act of social navigation. The emotional risk. The entire journey was a tightrope walk over a canyon of big feelings. The pride, the fear, the urge to hurry, the desire to look cool, the loneliness of being truly on his own. They watched him breathe through it, his small back straight, his pace steady. He was the observer of his own storm, and he was sailing right through it. The return trip was faster, confidence lending speed. When he turned back onto their street, a change came over him. The intense, careful mask of the pilot slipped, and the pure, unadulterated joy of the astronaut who had just walked on the moon broke through. A grin split his face, wide and brilliant. He wheeled into the driveway, executed a perfect kickstand deployment, and ran to the front door, a bundle of damp magazines clutched in his hand. He burst inside. The cool, conditioned air of the house met the heat of his triumph. He was panting, flushed, and radiant. He looked at his mother, then his father, his chest swelling. "Mission," he announced, the word a sacred declaration. Accomplished. Melissa's eyes filled. It wasn't just that he'd gotten the mail. It was the person he had been while doing it. He hadn't just been safe. He had been competent. He had woven every thread of risk, physical, emotional, social, practical, into a single, strong cord of capability. Donald knelt, taking the proffered mail like a received dispatch. "Status report, Captain? Hydrant turn needs work. Mailbox key is sticky. The Andersons got a new black dog. It's friendly." Donald pulled him into a firm, one-armed hug. Outstanding reconnaissance. Later, after the adrenaline had faded and Carl was drawing his route map in meticulous detail, Melissa leaned her head against Donald's shoulder. "He didn't just go to the mailbox," she said, her voice full of awe. "No," Donald agreed, kissing her hair. He integrated. The theory became practice. The safe risks aren't isolated lessons. They're a toolkit. Today, he used every tool in the belt. He looked at Carl, tongue out in concentration over his map. "He's not just a kid we're keeping safe anymore, Mel. He's a citizen of the world. And he just paid his first tax." Melissa looked at the triumphant, smudged map Carl held up for their inspection. She saw the 4 blocks, but she also saw the vast, newly charted territory of her son's own growing soul, a country she was no longer afraid for him to explore. The duffel bag lay open on Carl's bed like a hungry mouth. Melissa fed it with military precision. Rolled socks, bug spray in a sealed plastic bag, 3 extra shirts for every one day, a medical kit comprehensive enough for minor surgery. Each item was a silent prayer, a physical ward against the chaos of a week at Pinecrest Adventure Camp. The room felt hollow, the spaces where Carl's favorite books and models usually lived echoing with impending absence. Donald watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame. He saw not just a mother packing, but a general fortifying a castle she was about to vacate. Finally, he crossed the room and placed a single, simple notebook on top of the neat piles of clothing. It was a sturdy, unlined journal with a charcoal gray cover. "What's that?" Melissa asked, pausing with a roll of waterproof Band-Aids in her hand. "Essential gear," Donald said. He turned to Carl, who was carefully selecting which dinosaur figurine deserved a trip into the wilderness. "This is for the victories, the mysteries, and the questions. The stuff you see when we're not there to see it with you. The stuff you feel that you might forget to tell us." Carl ran a hand over the cover, his expression solemn. He understood the weight of the gift. It was a tool like the hammer. It was for real work. Melissa's packing slowed as night fell. She moved through the quiet rituals, checking the camp's packing list for the 10th time, labeling the inside of Carl's rain jacket, but her energy had shifted from preparation to pure dread. After tucking a thoroughly overstimulated Carl into bed, she stood in the doorway of his room, staring at the empty space where he would not be sleeping tomorrow night. The phantom sounds of his breathing seemed to haunt the air. She felt Donald's presence behind her before his hands settled on her shoulders. "Come on," he murmured, guiding her gently away. In the living room, the silence was different. It was full of the ghost of Lego explosions, the memory of sticky kitchen floors, the echo of triumphant bike rides. Donald didn't turn on the lights. Moonlight silvered the edges of the furniture. "He's going to forget to reapply sunscreen," Melissa said, her voice small in the dim room. "He'll get a blister on the hike. What if he can't open his juice box at lunch? What if the other boys have a game with rules he doesn't understand and his tornado comes?" The questions poured out, each one a thread in the cage she had spent a lifetime weaving. Donald turned her to face him. His eyes were soft but certain in the moonlight. "Melissa, look around. We haven't been building a cage." He gestured into the shadows, as if pointing to invisible structures. "We've been building scaffolding. Strong, solid, anchored deep. Built for the specific purpose of holding him as he climbs higher than we can reach." He held his hands up, fingers spread as if framing a building. "But scaffolding has spaces between the rails. It has to. So the builder can see the world, feel the wind, learn to trust his own balance. The 4 risks, the trying, the physical, the social, the emotional, they weren't holes in our protection. They were the spaces. They were the blueprint." His words settled over her, a new blueprint for her own fears. She saw it suddenly, clearly. The controlled chaos of the workshop, the tense negotiation on the playground, the silent sit amidst the Lego wreckage. They hadn't been failures of safety. They had been intentional, open spaces in the support system. "The scaffolding doesn't move with him," Donald continued, his voice a low, steady rhythm. "It stays where we build it. He's going to climb away from it this week. He'll look back and see its shape, know it's there if he needs to come down and touch base. But the view from up there, that's his to discover." Melissa leaned into him, her forehead against his chest. She thought of Carl's hands, so small wrapping around the juice carafe, so determined on the rope net, so fierce with the hammer, so lost after the Lego storm. She saw them now, holding a pencil over a blank notebook page, ready to write his own story. "This safe risk wasn't just for him, was it?" she whispered into his shirt. Donald's arms tightened around her. "No, my love. It never was. The biggest risk is ours. The risk of letting go, plank by plank, trusting the structure we built together. And trusting the climber we built it for." The next morning, at the bus departure point, the air was a cacophony of shouted last-minute reminders and sniffled goodbyes. Carl, his duffel looking enormous on his small frame, stood tall. He accepted Melissa's fierce, prolonged hug, her words a torrent in his ear about hydration and listening to his counselors. He endured it, then turned to Donald. Donald didn't offer a hug. He offered a hand. Carl shook it, his grip firm. "Remember," Donald said, leaning down. "You are the climber. You know the tools. You've felt the wind. Now go see the view." Carl nodded, a glint of excitement and nerves in his eyes. He hoisted his bag, the notebook tucked into the side pocket, a manual for his own journey. As he climbed the bus steps, he didn't look back with worry. He looked back once, from the top step, and raised a single hand, not a wave of goodbye, but a salute of acknowledgement to the scaffolding. Melissa watched the yellow bus turn the corner and vanish. The world did not end. The scaffolding held. She took a deep, shuddering breath of the suddenly empty air, and for the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like sky.